All right. Welcome to my podcast. Today we're going to be talking about failure, which is the main theme for my Unit 1 essay this semester. I'm joined by my friend Cole.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So, to start off our conversation on failure, the first question, what do you think of when you hear the word failure? And now I'll go first on this one. So, when I hear the word failure, immediately I think it has a negative connotation, of course, which is like, you fail something, you don't get what you want, you fall short of some goal. Obviously, it's never a good thing, not something to be celebrated. I've failed a lot in my life, and I know that it definitely brings you down. But I also think that failure is a natural process of life. I think that failure is completely unavoidable, like it's something that happens to everybody. And I think that we're going to have a good discussion here because failure can mean a lot of things. So, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
No, that's very true. I agree. I think failure is pretty frowned upon and generally attempted to be avoided in our society. And I think that there's definitely a lot of contrasting perspectives on failure around the world. But it's definitely certainly a main driving point in human interaction as well as our lifestyles.
Yeah. So to build on that, question 2, just to provide a little context here. Question 2 is what's a personal failure you once saw as negative but now think is valuable? And I'll go first again for this one. So a personal failure that comes to mind for me is this past semester in the fall, a student organization I'm a part of, I ran for a position on the executive board, and I lost. I lost to my opponent, who was older than me, had more tenure in the organization. Understandable that I lost, but it was still a big hit. But now, this semester, I participated in the executive board elections again. I ran for another position. And the experience of having lost last semester was very valuable to me. It was a learning experience, and because of how I learned from that past failure, I actually achieved a position. I was elected this semester, so I think that's extremely valuable. Can you think of an example, Cole?
Well, sure. Okay, so when I was a kid, I always struggled with some learning issues, and especially this manifested with my inability to tie my shoes correctly till I was about 14 years old. And early on, this didn't bother me too much. In middle school, I would just run around with my shoes untied, but people would often step on my shoelaces and make me trip. It was because I found it difficult to learn, for some reason, the movements necessary to tie my shoes. But the thing about this was, through all this time that I spent running around with untied shoes, tripping and falling, I was practicing tying my shoes. And at first I could not succeed, but eventually I did learn. But it just took a long time and a lot of, as we said, failure to learn that.
So the failure from not being able to tie your shoes for a long time is what motivated you to eventually pick up the skill and develop the ability to tie your own shoes. So,
Sorry.
it's okay. All right. So this brings me into my next question. Do you think failure is necessary for growth, and why or why not? So I'm going to let you go first on this one. Do you think that failure is something that's beneficial to growth? Is it necessary to growth? And if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Failure is directly correlated to growth. You can't really have personal growth without failure, because in order to correct a mistake or a behavior or something, you first have to see that it is negative. And the only way to see that something is negative is to experience failure. So
yeah, exactly. I agree. I think failure, sure, it's not a great thing, but it provides the perspective on what happens if you don't put effort into improving something. if you want to know what areas to improve, you have to first identify where the problem is, and a lot of the time that is done through failure. So yeah, I am glad we agree that failure is absolutely necessary for growth and is correlated with growth. So question 4, moving into a slightly new area, do you think that there is a difference between the act of failing and being a failure? Personally, I do think there is a great difference between the two. I think failing does not necessarily mean that you are a failure. Even repetitive failure over and over and over again does not mean you are a failure. I think failing is an act. It is something that like happens, but being a failure is a mindset. It's when you're opposed to bouncing back from failure and having a growth mindset. I think a person who is a failure is only different from a person who is not a failure in the sense that when they do experience failure, they do nothing to change what led them to do so. So I think that being a failure is more of a negative mindset than an actual physical state of being.
Characteristic.
Exactly. Do you have anything to add on
No,
that?
that was perfectly said.
Spot on.
Perfectly said.
I'm glad. I think that, definitely being a failure is more of a mindset, and that's something that I touched upon heavily in my Unit 1 essay. So last question here before we move on to just some general talking points, and I'm going to let you go first on this one. Would you rather never fail again or never stop learning?
So when we say never fail again, that means never putting yourself in a position where you can fail, which means never taking a risk, which means that you would just be stuck in the exact same place that you are currently forever. So to answer that question, I would actually rather never stop learning, because I think that would be more interesting overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think that to never fail is to just stay in the same place as you talked about, and obviously learning is much more valuable than avoiding failure altogether. I think that failure is what leads to learning, and yeah, I think that failure can be seen as a tool for sure.
Oh, definitely.
So last point here, a quote from my Unit 1 essay that I'd like us to talk about. So in the essay I said, failure in my experience is something to be achieved rather than avoided. And what I'm trying to get at here is that first of all, failure should not be avoided. I think it's healthy to put yourself in positions where you might experience failure. And when I say failure is something to be achieved, I mean that in the sense that not necessarily a person should strive to fail, but they should definitely want to experience failure so that they have motivation to do better and they have motivation to improve and learn.
Yeah, exactly. So think of something that makes you nervous, that you're afraid to do, and think about why you're afraid to do that thing. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be because you're afraid to fail. So if you put yourself in the position of failing, you can eliminate the factor that makes you afraid to do the thing, and like that is the singular most effective way to improve yourself, I would say, from my own experience.
Yeah, I agree. So that just about wraps up this podcast. I think we had some valuable discussions, some valuable talking points here, and I'll see you in the next episode.
All right, thanks for having me.
Yep.